course, many of you were with us then, Representative Haddad and Senator Lewis. Great to have you then, great to have you back. So we are delighted at the Women's Power Gap Initiative at the EOS Foundation to be able to present a little bit of longitudinal data. This is one of the first times where we've got a baseline from 2 years ago and we can tell you what has changed. So without further ado, let me get started with the data. So parity on board, gender, race, and ethnicity on 50 prominent Massachusetts public boards and commissions. Next slide, please. So what's happened since 2019? We had among chief executives, so we took these 50 boards and commissions that, speaking to a number of you all, a number of the legislators said, these are the ones that are very prominent, the people that are trying to get on. So we said, let's take a look and see where they were in 2019 and now where they are today. So among the chief executives of each of these, some are called executive directors, some are even called commissioner, there were 13 transitions. So there are 50 boards, but there were actually 41 positions, CEO or executive director positions, and there were 13 transitions, which is a lot of opportunity. So we had 13 opportunities to add women, and particularly women of color and men of color, of course. So with these 13 transitions, 6 out of 13 were women, 3 were men of color, but there were no women of color. So that was a really missed opportunity in my mind, and a disappointment that we weren't able in those 13 transitions to find any women of color to fill those positions. There wasn't net a huge increase in women because some of the transitions, women were leaving positions. So the number of women increased from 9 to 10. And as we said, the women of color stayed flat. Of the woman of color, the one is Black, and we think it's really important for us to have disaggregated data on women of color, so you know Black, Asian. So that's something that we're going to continue to push for. Men of color increased from 5% to 10%, 2 Black, 2 Latino. So that was some nice improvement that we saw for men of color among the CEOs. Next slide, please. So let's look at board chair transitions. So once again, how many opportunities did we have to diversify these board chair positions? We had 11 opportunities. 7 out of 11 were women. That is great, right? We're making ground towards parity. 1 man of color. Once again, no women of color among those board transitions. So this was a real moment that we actually say that there was intentionality clearly on behalf of the Baker administration, and I want to give a big shout out to the Baker administration because it worked. Women increased from 17 of 50 board chairs to 22. That's a significant increase. That is something that's substantive. So we went from 34% to 44%, but as I said, we really now got to use that same intentionality to make sure that women of color are increasing. The current women of color, their board chairs, there are 3, 1 Asian and 2 Latina. In terms of board chairs, men of color stayed flat from 2019 to 2021. Next slide, please. So the findings, the good and the bad. There was progress for white women, as I just mentioned, 34 to 44%. Progress for men of color as chief executives, 5 to 10%, but no progress for women of color. And I just want to have us all absorb that for a minute. This is really consistent with our other studies. White women are making progress. When institutions turn towards intentionality, they are able to do it, but it's harder they have a harder time really. They find white women, they find men of color, but they just aren't casting a wide enough net. They're not focusing enough on women of color. So we are, in our work, that's sort of our laser beam. I think that has to be the laser beam for this work. Next slide, please. So we also, there weren't a lot of big gains on the actual, among board members, getting boards of the 50 boards, how many reached gender parity. So in 2019, 16 of the 50 boards had 50% or more women on them, 32%. And in 2021, you see it in the pink slide, it went from 16 to 18 out of 50. So we have some work to do. Next slide, please. So one of the things that is critical that I want everybody to remember from this presentation is that we have an urgent need for data transparency to drive progress. So we didn't get the gender and race data from the administration, and we urgently want to partner with the administration so that we can. We actually had to do it on our own. We had to look up photos, look up pronouns, and that limited our ability, and we weren't able to find race and ethnicity data for the board members themselves. We just found it for the board chairs and the CEOs. So that is absolutely critical, and that's something that the administration could put in effect right now. You don't need legislation for that to happen. I do want to mention that this bill does call for that. It calls for demographic data provided by all board and commission applicants. So anybody who applies, they would have the option to self-identify and give us their demographic data, ethnicity, race, gender, and sexual orientation. And then you would also get the data from all of those that are appointed. And remember, this is aggregated data, so nobody's privacy would be pierced by doing this. So again, I really want to call to the attention that this is something we could do tomorrow. Next slide. And I'm not going to go through these, but this slide and the next two that follow just list these 50 commissions so that if anybody wants a copy of the slide deck, you'll have it. So my 3 takeaways that I ask for all of you to keep with you are that number 1, intentionality works. It worked. Thank you to the Baker administration for your intentionality in the last 2 years. Now let's take it. Point number 2, didn't see progress for women of color. So let's make sure that that's our laser beam focus. And number 3, let's get the data. Let's get the data. Let's get the data so we can actually see within the boards themselves. I bet there's some progress to be had. Thank you so much.